Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Jose Stevens. I'm a board member for the Society of Shamanic Practice, SSP. And today I have the privilege of interviewing Orland Bishop, who is the winner of the Eagle Feather Award for 2021. And we had over 50 nominations this year, uh, and many very worthy nominations. And I want to congratulate you, Orland, for being our winner this year.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I'm grateful for the support to be able to have this gift into my life, this award, and to become part of this luminous community of keepers of this deep, deep tradition. So I'm happy to be among those who have received it before and those who will. But I want to also share it with those who, for part of this nomination year, to say that I'm grateful that the spirit of this award is touching every one of our lives.
Well, I understand that you were born in Guyana,
Yes.
and then came to the United States. I wonder if you could say something about any experiences in your early years, maybe coming from that culture, or just life experiences that set the stage for you, for your work in life, and in particular your shamanic work.
Yes. Thank you so much. I was born in Guyana, on a small town on the river carrying the name the Demerara River. And Guyana, in the indigenous language of the people, is the land of many waters. So that's what the word means, land of many waters. And it's a water world. Lots of major rivers, waterfalls, streams, and right on the Atlantic coast as well. So a large part of the country is under the water table of the Atlantic Ocean. So during the migration and occupation of Guyana in the colonial era, the land had to be built up to protect itself from the Atlantic Ocean tides. And with the African and Dutch irrigation technologies, they were many waterways, canals, and such that were built in to keep the rain and flood water in balance. And so I grew up very much in the water element, which was also my birth element, and became the core process of my early experiences in connecting with the forces of nature. So after I was born, my family moved to the capital city, which was, as I said, on the Atlantic Ocean coast. And it was there around 7 years of age when my brothers and I went to the ocean to swim, and I walked out and fell into a hole in the ocean and just went down. And during that experience, a light filled the hole. And the light allowed me to adjust my awareness to something else, which I could see. And I had the experience as if I was breathing underwater, or at least breathing without the water coming into me. And when the event was over, I was just spinning in this vortex of light. And then when it subsided, I floated to the top of the water, and someone was walking by, pulled me up, and I stood up. And I had just a very terrible headache. And I remember just going and sitting on a rock, and my brothers came and asked, did you almost drown? And I said no, because I was breathing, but I was afraid of the forces that came into my psyche. And so I just lived with the story, and they thought I was drowning, because that was the rationale of why would I be underwater and not take in any water. But I didn't have the experience of my lungs being affected by water. I didn't lose any aspect of awareness in that sense. I just became far more aware of something else. And when I was around 28 years old, doing a ritual with a shaman from Burkina Faso, she told me that she told me that I was she invoked some beings in their tradition that communicated directly to me that my grandfather had pulled me into what they called the well. And I responded that my grandfather, they were all died before I was born. And said, yeah, oh yes, we know that, but your grandfather from 5 generations back pulled you into the well to pass his medicine on to you. So you're now the carrier of that. And what I learned about him, he was from Sierra Leone, 5 generations back, and he was a water diviner. And so he would create this energetic vortex in the water and put people in that were ill, and they will be healed from the energy that the water will generate. And this is a long-standing traditional practice in West Africa called submersion. It's a form of baptism and the early tradition of what the water allows the human being to recover as memory. But it can also take on these higher capacities of light that then move energy in a very different way. And so from 7 years old, I had the experience of watching the rain or connecting to streams and just amount of information that will become accessible just by standing in the rain. And so those currents stayed alive since childhood.
And did working with water become a part of your tools?
It is a direct contact to the other worlds and to my own ancestral lineage, to places, to times in the future, because there's for me, the ocean and the rivers are already time flows, different currents, and of course most civilizations emerge close to rivers because of not only the fact that it brings water for propagating plants and animals and such, but it brings the psyche into coherence of other kinds of realities we call futures.
So that was like your first major initiation?
That was my first major initiation. Around 2 years before then, around 5 years old, I awoke one morning when in school. I was aware that one of my teachers wanted my attention in class. We start school quite early in Guyana. And during one of the sessions, I was pulled into another kind of imagination. And when the teacher called my name, I looked at her and she thought I was not paying attention. And my attention, however, was very concentrated. And I kind of read her mind. I saw that she was thinking whether she should punish me for not paying attention or not. And I thought to myself, why would she do something her heart is telling her not to do? And then I made the decision I would never betray my heart. I thought that into myself, that I would never go against what my heart is telling me. And I didn't know what that was, but I saw the two different orientations of awareness, and I chose one. I chose the heart. And the next day I woke up 2 hours earlier and just sat in contemplation, meditation, visualization of what my mind and heart could understand. And my pathway of knowledge came from the heart. I was not so much a good student, I was a good investigator of realities. And even in class, as they were teaching things, I realized they didn't know everything about what they were teaching. But I would take it, I would be patient with it, and then I would go home after that and do my own research. I had a little garden from about 8, 9 years old. I had researched these experiments of putting a seed into a glass jar and watching the seed open to different stages. And I trained my observation from a child to look at things in a very different way. And part of the gift that Guyana received in 1969, 3 years after I was born, the country was gifted a piece of moon rock after the landing of the moon. And every week I would go to the museum where this moon rock was, and I would be in direct observation of this piece of the moon every week, every Saturday, because it took me there.
Yes.
So my pathway was more self-guided for most of my childhood and youth, and I didn't meet many of my teachers until much later.
So you came to the United States sometime in your childhood, or?
Yes, I was about 14 years old when I came
Uh-huh.
to the United States with my parents, yes, and finished my last 2 years of high school in New York. So the family was living at that time in Brooklyn, New York. And the day after I arrived was the worst blizzard in 15 years.
Oh,
So the city was completely closed down for weeks with the snow piled up. And I thought I'm coming from, a tropical country, 85 degrees temperature around to snow. And that was but it was also water in another way.
yes, right.
So for me, just looking at it come into the world and piled up, and every day I would take a walk out, and it was almost like the snow is holding more information because it's not melting away as rain or washing away as rain would. So walking in it was like walking on the moon, walking on another planet, because the water concentrated profound amount of energy.
So then you decided to go to medical school, right?
Yes, I came to California in 1984 to study medicine.
And then can you say how that was for you, the process of studying allopathic medicine in the traditional way? And
Well, what was still living in me was, what is life? What is the memory of wellness, of health? Where does it come from? Because we're interacting with the environments we're taking in the world. We get influenced by that. I knew that. But how do I get back to well-being? Where's the energy for that? For me, music was part of it. I studied music when I was in high school. And if I cognize music in a certain way, I know I feel better. I also know that when I was studying just literature, if I read certain things, my mind will get better, and so does my feeling get better. So I knew that information allows people to find access to certain energies. But also for me, I knew from also childhood and friends that right relationships help a person recover. And having someone that you admire in life helps you recover.
right.
These things, by the time I went into college, university, I was memorizing poems because those poems had information that I could go back to and rebuild my awareness. I was studying philosophies and mythologies from different cultures, and I felt really secure in the awareness that there's more to our environment than we utilize.
Yeah.
New York was a hard place for me as a youngster. I couldn't live into it. So when I came to California, it was the energy of this place was so right. Then I felt, okay, I can go into something here. And it was a school. The environment itself was a school of awareness. During maybe 1995, I was in one of my English professors. I was at Los Angeles City College at the time, because my plans for college didn't go as I had planned. Different things happened when I came here. And so I joined my classes at one of the city colleges here in Los Angeles. And my English teacher came into the social space one day and was calling all of us in, like, come, we have a guest speaker that you have to hear. And I followed him to the classroom, and a gentleman walked in wearing a white shirt and khaki slacks, and he introduced himself and he said, my name is Carlos Castaneda, and I'm happy to be here. He had been invited maybe a few years before, but he didn't show up then, and he came unannounced. So the teacher was just rushing to get as many people into the room. And when he started to share about, his own experience with this wisdom, I thought, I know that world that he's talking about. I knew it. And I went and got his books, and it kind of opened up. Even that was before I really even went into medicine. I went into the observation of these other realities. So yeah, I bought a separate reality, and I bought, his thing. So that was my first purchase of the door into shamanism.
Yes.
Was Castaneda's books, and having the chance to actually meet him before I even opened the books was a good start.
Yeah. What I find, I'm fascinated here because I grew up in that neighborhood near LA City College.
Oh, wow.
And well, I can practically put myself there. And I understood later that Carlos Castaneda lived somewhere in that neighborhood. But of course, I didn't know him. At that time, I didn't, I was a child. So
Yeah.
it's very interesting.
Yeah.
So then I understand you didn't complete medical school, and that you went off and began to work in conflict resolution. Is that accurate?
Well, partially. I continued my studies in science and medicine in both allopathic traditions, but not as a certified physician. I kept up with, because I have many friends who are physicians, and I trained and mentored a lot of doctors and healthcare practitioners who are still in the field of allopathic medicine. So when I left LA City College as a pre-med, I went to Charles Drew University of Medicine in Watts. And it was a traditionally Black medical school, the only one west of the Mississippi. And so it had the orientation of giving guidance to the cultural appropriate health process.
Yeah.
But even though it was still allopathic, it had the sensitivity that it had to address the cultural roots of well-being for African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And but it was also in a community of Watts that had at that time the highest activity of gang violence in the city of Los Angeles. The Bloods and the Crips were already at war in Watts during that time. So while I was studying medicine, I was meeting, the impact of violence coming into the hospital. So we had a trauma center that met all the violence that were coming in. And so I was part of a center called the Center for the Study of Violence and Social Change, following the work of Frantz Fanon. We were looking into Frantz Fanon's understanding of the impact of slavery on consciousness and the resilience power of the soul to be able to repair oneself in spite of the environment that were oppressive. And so part of my study during the time of medicine, I was also studying the cultural phenomenology of what it is that's living into the destiny as a people, particularly in a place like Watts, which had a very potent history of immigration coming in from different parts of the world, Chinese and other groups in the early phases, and then of course in the 1940s, the African American migration from the South, and that community was similar in Los Angeles to what Harlem was in New York. Yeah. So it had the cultural basis of so much. So I knew there were many contradictions, that the violence was not characteristic of a group of people who were already harmonizing on another level. So we were studying that. And during that time, I met a friend who was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS. In fact, I took him to the hospital while he was very sick. He was staying at my home and he was very sick. And I asked him, should I, just take you into the emergency room? And they observed him for a couple of days, and then he was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS. And he asked me, am I going to die? And I didn't answer it as yes or no. I said, what do you want to know? Not like, am I going to die, but what do you want to know?
Yeah. And
we started a journey into his deeper soul experience, which lasted 3 years. And it is at the point of caring for him, my studies got interrupted and disrupted by so many factors of his health care. But at the time, my own recovery of consciousness was happening through different other experiences. And one day I went to see him when he was in hospice care. And when I walked in, he was sleeping. So I thought, okay, now I'll just leave and return. And as I was turning to leave, he said, you better do what you're here to do. And I turned around and looked at him and he was sleeping. And I thought, I knew I heard his voice. So I asked again, what did you say? And he said, you heard me. You better do what you're here to do. And if you don't do it, you will regret it. And it was as if something was speaking from another realm. I pulled up a chair next to his bed and I sat there and I asked, well, what am I here to do? And he said, don't play games with me. You know what you're here to do. Huh. And I just closed my eyes and I tried to remember. And it was just like a total recall of different realities, different levels of knowing, things that I experienced as a child all became. And when he woke up, really woke up into this physical space, he looked at me like, what are you doing here? How long have you been here? And I kind of, said, well, I was just sitting here with you. And that was 1 month before he died, it would just stretch my awareness. I would follow him through depths of this cognitive state of just being in the other realm. And we would just vision and experience the phenomena of what happens after soul leaves here. And he would go and sometimes for 2-3 days and then come back. We became conscious and we would talk about some things. And then one day in January 1995, he left. But he left with instructing me how to be in touch with his own spirit, mm-hmm. which will be, constant visitation. And then my own ancestors and his ancestors and others will come. So it was my initiation into what I knew as working with the ancestral world directly. And I resigned from my medical studies because I was conflicted with the understanding of saying that certain illnesses can't be healed, and then my own spirit wanting to understand why and why not.
Mm-hmm.
And but I stayed in the research as an independent researcher, and followed the science. And I apprenticed. I got a degree in naturopathy. I was apprenticing with a naturopath. And at that time, you know, it was more like an apprenticeship process. So I completed a degree with her. She was a forerunner in the naturopathic medicine field. And I'm so sorry, there's some caulking. Yeah, in the naturopathic field, and was able to have a tremendous amount of understanding from her how healing happens with plant medicine, with vibrational medicine, with water, hydrotherapy, massage therapy, physical therapy. So I covered a lot of work those years, and then went into quantum science research as well.
You were involved in some mystical studies of like the Rosicrucians and some other groups of that nature. And you know, there's a lot of controversy among academics about the differences between shamanism and mysticism.
Yeah.
And not that I have any problem with those two, but it is an ongoing sort of debate.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what you have to say about that, since you've been involved in both. And do you see them as being somehow incompatible, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question very much. And I think there's a difference. There's a difference in the accessibility to, through perception, through doorways of perception and the chemical body, how shamanism evolves to be a communication between the realities of nature. So nature as a doorway allows us to be in contact with mineral, plant, and animal life forces, the ecologies within that space. I would understand it to be shamanism. When we move into the ancestral world, we're moving into another level of more cognition, more memory from the soul, the part where it's time orientation. So nature is not time, it's space, spatial, profound spaces of beingness and ecologies working to provide orientation to elemental wisdom. When we go into the ancestral world, as we go into the ancestral world, we enter into time, past, present, future, a different kind of orientation, where knowledge of people who have lived many years before, and people who, you know, we may even come at some other point in the future to the physical plane. It's a very different reality. So this is where mysticism for me would be more of a reality.
Yeah.
You're dealing with soul consciousness and the evolution of certain creative powers of beings beyond the human or beyond even the earth realm itself.
Many shamans around the world
Yeah.
work with their ancestors
Yeah.
and consider that to be a very important part of their work, and they call upon them as allies to
Yeah.
help them. So what you're saying is that 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 would be a more mystical aspect that they're tapping into there. In addition,
Yes, it borders. So for me to call on my ancestors, I have to know that I amplify myself when I do that. my own energies gets amplified, my own memories become accessible, my sense perception changes to be more accurate with the reality that my physical body is in. So now that quantum science can say that we have 5 generations of that memory in us. So it's not just that I'm calling them, I'm invoking their wisdom within another field that then activates the energies in me.
Yeah.
And now, so that phenomenology of the body carries these 5 generations of memory. And it goes into many different practices of how to bring into the healing aspect that memory, so that they're not just living as energies in the unconscious, they then can become conscious and become more me in this particular time frame. So again, ancestor is a relational process. Every generation of ancestors that I invoke, I have access to a greater field of memory. But then I'm the channel for it.
Right. One of my great interests is Toltec shamanism, which is the shamanism of central Mexico, the ancient traditions there. And they speak a great deal of ancestors. One of the things that they do is they have ways of, because they say that we inherit also, in addition to good things, we inherit many problems from the ancestors, conditioning and all their painful experiences and addictions and things like that come through the blood. And now we know it's DNA. But they created techniques and practices to clear those ancestral patterns away. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, like.
So yes, I've been working with techniques of recovering ancestral memory in the body. I've gone through a number of initiations in South Africa, West Africa, some of the Lakota indigenous practices here with some elders. I would say phenomenology, the deeper observation of training my own sense perception to open up by, will intention, how to read these different fields. And so I could call on my own personal ancestors, or I can call on the ancestors of other people to support me for other things that I want to do. And the pathways is that which level of organs allow my ancestors to come to me, and then which other organs allow other people's ancestors to come to me.
I see.
Because they're very different pathways. And so all our organs, and this goes back to Chinese meridian theories as well, that if you're doing acupuncture, you're opening up time powers because different organs, different meridians open up to different levels of the cosmos and physical earth. And so these channels have to do with the complexity not only of the physical earth plane where we have our natural world, but in other planets, for me, the moon and other planets that are orientations to my cosmologies, out of zodiac, out of star systems that are connected to memories that come to me. And this is more the mystical part, is that they're beings that are non-human or not in the realm of nature as we know it. And so we'll call them, extraterrestrial realities that informs higher levels of cognition, particularly as it relates to the pineal and pituitary.
Right.
And when these faculties are open, we're not in just the physical earth plane alone. And there's some shamanic practices that teaches how to open the doors to the star wisdom, to the stellar or the lunar and solar wisdom of life. And so these are also part of my own, investigation.
Mm-hmm. Could you speak to these sometimes require trance states or altered states to open up? Could you say something about that? Perhaps your experience with altered states, a shamanic, as Michael Harner called it, the shamanic states of consciousness, in which he was referring to altered states.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. I discovered, as I said, from 5 years old, that the phenomena of altering states of consciousness can be done with intention. Like most rituals are shaped by the intention of what the practitioner wants to open as a door of energy.
Yeah.
And when I chose, I said, my heart faculty, as 5 years old, say I would make sure I pay attention to the heart. Then later I learned that the heart cognition could replace my brain cognition, so to speak, and have a different access to energies and information that does not require the logic of choosing the way that we normally would choose with the intellect. Or alteration. The heart is an integrator of energies and informations that does not require altering the mind, but it becomes intuitive through utilizing etheric forces. So the heart creates another kind of cognition that is still here without going there. So I don't leave my mind anywhere behind. I take it with me. I practice. You bringing it to the vibrational level that it's required to be a host for the reality that I'm investigating. And I do it only with intention. I've never used plant medicine in my life. Mm-hmm. I've never altered my consciousness by any other substance to the degree that I can't control. I mean, I had some wine and that's as far as I may go. And that is uncomfortable for me. Really uncomfortable for me to not have my heart and mind constantly in the right rhythm. And yes, I appreciate the fact that plant medicine and such could take things further, but I know as well that the chemistry of the body, when appropriately engaged with intention, can open up to altered states, as we call them. And that's my interest is to teach how that happens.
This is a fascinating topic. I'd like to continue, but I want to get to Malidoma Somé, who is one of your teachers. Can you say something about how you made his acquaintance and the work that you've done with him? And recently he passed, very recently.
Right, yeah.
So I was wondering if you could share something about that with us.
Yeah, thank you for bringing him in. Yeah, he's very present in my awareness today as well. I met Malidoma in 1991 here in Los Angeles, actually at a retreat in Malibu. He was facilitating with Robert Bly, Michael Mead, James Hillman, and some others, Martin Practice. They all were creating an event for the men's work, as they were calling it back then. And a friend invited me to the retreat. It was a 5-day retreat, and I went in, and there were great stories and poems and rituals, and Malidoma was facilitating some of his rituals. And I remember something I shared in the group, and he came to me and said, oh, your ancestors were speaking very strongly through you. And I would love to, get to know you and where you're coming from. And we just had an amazing connection right away. And he was writing his book of Water and the Spirit at the time. It
Oh, yeah.
wasn't yet published. And so he sent me a galley copy. He said, you can get to know me if you read this book a little bit more. And so we became close friends, and he became my mentor in that work. So I had known him for about 8 years. And then I was invited to come to South Africa to meet Credo Mutwa, Vizumu Zulu Credo Mutwa, who was the last Sanusi in the Zulu tradition there in South Africa. And during my time there with Credo Mutwa, he wrote a letter that he asked me to bring back to Malidoma, which was to inform Malidoma of the level of ritual that I'm supposed to be engaged with. And Malidoma could not do it personally. He asked me if I would consent to him inviting his elders in Burkina Faso to do it. And so I went there with him in 1999. But in 1998, Baba Mutwa had already opened up for me what I came here to do. They call it the Seventh Shrine. And again, it was this form of cognition that I mentioned a moment ago, that I remembered how to open up the various levels of these other states of reality and go into dialogues with beings, human and others. And so when I went to Malidoma's village in 1999, they facilitated a ceremony called a merger with the Contumble Shrine of his tradition, and started the investigation to see what it was that my ancestors were asking them to do on my behalf. And each time, like, okay, we don't have someone who does that form of ritual, but we'll give you what we have. And I learned after going back to see Credo Mutwa in 2001 that it was really on my path to just do it independently of tradition. So a lot of my work is not held in traditional sense. Anyhow, I'm connected to a lot of traditional people who help. And Malidoma was one. We did research, actually. We did not do traditional training. When I'm with him, we look at different things and journey into the field, because when I'm there in the village and the diviners are doing their divination, they're looking at me and it's almost to them like they're watching a movie. So Malidoma used to laugh, like, Orland, they're watching your movie. And I said, what are they talking about? That you're creating things that you don't know, your thinking is just creating it. And they're seeing it. So these elders used to just stand around me and watch my thinking, feeling process create access to these fields. And they would just, give me the support to keep doing that, but they never really instructed me.
Is that because they've lost some of their tradition, or is that because they were regarding you as a pioneer?
Well, both. They've lost something, because the Africans that were taken out of Africa and forced into slavery created another event in the soul. For those hundreds of years, the soul transmigrated from the physical plane of Earth to other dimensions. So one can say the slavery was an altered state for the consciousness of those who were enslaved. It was an initiation. No one would want it because it was so terrible.
Yeah.
But that's what initiation is, a transmutation of personality. Everything is taken away and you're forced into a dilemma. And the only way to reunite is to reunite at a place or time in which your consciousness could then be fully under the control of your destiny. And there was an African initiate, Pascal Beverly Randolph, who was a contemporary of Abraham Lincoln. Randolph was a Rosicrucian, but he created the first Freemasonry lodges in the United States. He had more power in the occult tradition than the President of the United States, and facilitated the initiation of freed blacks, and particularly initiated the white leaders in the Freemasonry tradition here in the United States about what the future of blacks would be in this country. It inspired Lincoln, who was part of Randolph's Lodge in Philadelphia, to understand the occult significance of working with the dead, of which Lincoln was part initiated to understand. So the Civil War dead, Lincoln was in direct relationship to their powers of cognition when they died in the Civil War. He wrote to the wives of these dead soldiers a lot of things, but Lincoln was also being taught how to communicate with the death of his own son.
Oh, that's right.
Randolph, it would introduce mysticism and this form of spiritualism in the United States in the 1800s. And my lineage in the Gnostic school that I trained more formally here since 1991 comes out of the spiritual lodges of Pascal Beverly Randolph. And in the 1920s, the group established their centers here in Los Angeles, and my teacher came and joined them in 1939. And he studied in the spiritual lodges that went back into Egyptian mysticism and reconstructed a paradigm of training to reorient those who were enslaved, or the descendants of those who were enslaved, to recover what the soul gained during this enslavement period. And that was my work. That was what I came into life to do, to recover that memory. That goes back hundreds of years in the experience of slavery. And so that's what Kwedomutwa called me to South Africa. He met me in his dream, and I did not know who he was. I received a telephone call that I should come to South Africa, and I asked him what it is that, because I started to write this memory out called the Seventh Shrine, and I asked him, have you ever heard about this field of knowledge? And he said, no, but you wrote your birth story, you wrote what you came here to do, and you would not have a teacher for it, but you will have a community for it. And I found all of the pieces that I had to find all over the world in different traditions, including the Rosicrucian tradition that was reestablished in the 1700s in Europe, but it was Egyptian wisdom. And the Egyptian wisdom stayed in West Africa and South Africa after classical Egypt fell. The high priests went back into some of those indigenous communities in Mali and Ghana and Zimbabwe and some other places, and held the knowledge. So that's what I came into when I went to Africa, was not so much the traditional shamanic aspect, but the star wisdom that was held in a very different orientation.
So with that said, what is your mission now? What are you up to?
Yeah, well, to be in conversation like this, I feel like every time I hear your question, I feel I get to know myself even better. Because I it's not like I know what to do with it. It's not that. It's in service of human beings rectifying the gap between where we are in our lives and the world, and where the world needs to be, given the fact that we have the potential now in all fields of knowledge to utilize a different kind of agreement. So since 1984, I was working with a conception that the element of fire even though I was born into water element, I chose fire as a pathway of investigation. And fire had to do with different stages of our civilization. So we had a fire when we would just light a fire and go into different states of trance or storytelling or mythology, oral tradition, shamanism, this kind of space. And then the fire that had to do with communications between different states of consciousness and beings in those states of consciousness. And in many traditions, fire was given to humanity to liberate us from just being tied to the physical plane. And of course, we use fire for electricity, magnetism, light, friction, industrial combustion engines, all of these things, even nuclear fusion. All of it is fire. So we've come a long way with when fire was just a transference of knowledge from one person to another, a story, slow fire, to it becoming now so radical that it could destroy life as we know it on the physical plane, at least. But there are other fires that have to do with states of will that is held in the heart. So the heart cognition, as I've come to understand it, is a fire that transmutes histories, that, as you said, transmits genetics as we know it, and creates spontaneous creation processes, optimizing the human psyche for higher aspirations or inspirations. And this is really what was held in ancient Egyptian wisdom traditions. It got lost over time, fell into mythologies and theologies and all of these other facets of our current world views. And now it's being asked again to be recovered through initiation by other beings that are inspiring us. But technologies wouldn't reach them. We have to go through our own organs of cognition.
Yeah. Well, it's been said, I don't know exactly who, but that the future belongs to the union of shamanism and science. That's what we, if we look ahead, that's where that's what the world is where the world is going to take us. Can you comment on that?
It will be a synthesis of many, many, many fields.
Yeah.
Even the arts. And so when we look at in ancient Egyptian wisdom, which was for me African wisdom, what they call the lesser mysteries, as it was introduced into Greece, became seven. The seven aspects of the lesser mysteries were mathematics, geometry, music, logic, rhetoric, aesthetics, and ethics. So that shaped and created the intellectual school, the intellectual culture, to be able to read, write, and to calculate our time processes in the physical world. However, the greater mysteries had to do with developing consciousness in sleep and developing consciousness in death. So there were people who were actually had to die and then recovered from death to gain highest levels of development. And we don't do those in our culture. We've lost the knowledge to bring a person back from death. However, many people have been able to follow others into death or have had near-death experiences. And some of us, some people have actually crossed over, died, pronounced dead, and then have come back with other kinds of intelligences in that experience. So one can call it, different names, but the phenomena is understood as the soul. So the soul is maturing, not just an intellect to understand how to combine things, but the soul is developing capacity how to step out of memory, of history, and inheritances as a spontaneous initiation of light forces. So our light bodies are now becoming more accessible to us.
Mm-hmm.
And they move across the cosmos. One of the things Credomutu had told me, he said, it's easier to time travel than space travel because of the other bodies that are developing. And we will have the ability to go into other states of consciousness that actually give us more an accurate sense of what the human being is in another duration of time. And if we can sustain the development of these faculties of trust and love for those futures, we'll create them when we come back. Mm-hmm. But we're still going in with memories of the history of the past, and as a result of that, it gets contaminated.
Right. Well, I have we're running short on time here, and I want to just ask you one more question. Actually, I want to ask you hundreds of questions, but this is important, regarding the youth, the young people. I know you've just spent a lot of time working with young people, especially in the area of conflict resolution. And if there was anything that you would tell the younger people who are just now discovering who they are and choosing their life paths, what would you say to them?
Yeah. So this phenomenon we call puberty. It's not a psychological phase it's the shaman being born.
Yeah.
So this is a process that starts that generates the power of procreation. So the person becomes sexually mature to be able to have, the energies to create another human being. So that's puberty on a physiological, biochemical level. On the psychical level, it's the most potent time of connection with the ancestral world. Mm-hmm. So with the right support, those who are in puberty or after could actually integrate into our civilization some of the most potent futures if we protect them from, just inheriting our own stuff psychologically and other culturally, and give them a place for the real initiation that is being activated by this change in the blood chemistry. So in many traditional cultures, they appropriate things for the rites of passage of a young person coming of age in that sense. But in communities that have lost that, a fire gets born. And it could lead to violence, it could lead to mental challenges, it could lead to deep emotional challenges. But in a way, it can lead to a reaction in them that they don't want to be in this world because this world is finished, according to us.
Yeah.
They're in a process of communication with creational forces in many, many different levels. And so it's a time in which we have to suspend the normal world for them and give them support to just be in transformation with body and mind, to bring in the fire for a new cultural reality. It's so profound, a change. And that lasts from about 14 years old, sometimes younger, to about 21. And that age, when I meet them, I actually ask to explore their dreams, because in sleep, if they're able to be trained to wake up in sleep, the violence will go away. so this is a critical thing, that the thing that becomes oppositional and conflicting in this world is harmonic in the other world. It's a capacity for attracting a different experience of what the body needs to have. But the training is they have to sleep at a certain time, wake up at a certain time. It's like a vision quest for those 7 years to keep them in altering the states of consciousness, so that it's not just the cultural education about getting a job. That time of life is not about getting anything, but becoming more oneself. And so that's what Shetri, my organization that I founded after my friend Lazar died in 1995 of January. February, I just hold a space for these young people in Watts who were in gangs, and we call it Sanctuary. And I created a space in which they would just come, and no projection of what they should be doing, but to take away all of the psychological things that normally would impact them. And then they begin to talk about these other psychic states. One of them, I was a young gang member in Chicago. He asked me, "Do you believe in guardian angels?" And I said, yes. Why are you asking? He said, "Do you really believe in guardian angels?" I said, "Well, maybe you should tell me why you're asking me." And he said, a rival gang was chasing him down with a car to run him over with a car. He ran into an alley. This was a young Latino, 12-year-old kid. And he said the car was running to him, and then something grabbed his shoulders and lifted him in the air, put him over the fence, and the car crashed into the fence. And they're all looking up while this invisible force took him up and put him over the fence. Wow. And he looked at me, he said, "Do you believe it? That was a guardian angel." And I said, you have evidence of things that people are trying to prove. Like, go and talk to, let's talk, go to the priest and tell them you had a direct divine intervention or some kind of intervention. But this, I've seen it many times and encountered it with those who were closest to death and violence, the powers of the psyche, what they can see, and the adversarial forces that come in to challenge their minds to believe in something greater, or tempt them to take this person's life, because we don't know what the struggle is over this earth realm. Shamanism informed that there's a lot of forces that we have to be careful with in the realm of nature, because nature is not just a beautiful place. It is a host place for forces that remain hidden in the shadow of the collective unconscious and personal unconscious. And without initiation and the light of initiation, we all will be susceptible for forces that will manipulate the human will. Mm-hmm. And part of that young people is that they're challenged by these beings all the time, more than any other group. And so in my work, it wasn't just mediation of the violence and the conflict, was giving them sanctuary in which they'll tell me, there's a first night I get a chance to sleep without waking up because your light keeps these beings away. And so that's our work. We created a space when a person comes in, there will be no temptation for violence. There will be no agitation for violence. They're in a protected field of light.
Well, I don't want to keep you, and we've gone over. And
well, just know that this friendship will grow, and I'm so deeply grateful that you have been, holding so much of this with so many others, and I'm grateful to be in this conversation with you.
Well, this has been an extraordinary, wonderful opportunity to talk with you. And like I said, I could continue on and on, but we're completed our our interview here. So I'm so grateful to you for making the time. Thank you so much, and
Yeah.
it's been wonderful.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the community for the acknowledgement of my work and the friends who nominated me to be part of this. I'm so grateful. I was surprised when I got the invitation to yeah. So I'm happy, and if there's anyone in the community that wants to extend further conversations, I welcome that. So anytime.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Orland,
Have a great evening. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
too.